Before anything existed in the universe, even before the concepts of time and space made any sense, there was nothing. Not even the faintest whisper, nor a flicker of light to illuminate the deepest abyss. It was the infinite void, an incomprehensible immensity, where not even the idea of what could come to be existed. There were no colors, no shadows. It was a place where neither wind could have blown, nor water could have flowed. There was no land to tread upon, no stars to admire. This void was so vast that its silence was suffocating. If a mortal had existed then, they would have felt such deep anguish that their spirit would have been instantly destroyed by the pressure of nothingness. But there was nothing and no one to feel it. The void was its own ruler, a desolate kingdom where silence not only reigned but devoured everything. For unimaginable eras, this void endured. Eons upon eons passed without any change. Even the concept of change was something that couldn't exist in that abyss. Yet strangely enough, somewhere deep within this nothingness, two forces existed. They were as ancient as the void itself, and though they had no form or name, they had opposing natures. One was Tengvun, the spirit of the sky, an energy containing the promise of light, though it had not yet manifested. Lungyeng, the soul of the earth, was its counterpart. She slept deep within the void, holding within her the matter that would one day form everything we know. The earth, the mountains, the rivers, the trees. But Lungyeng too remained still. Neither knew of the other's existence. Tengvun and Lungyeng were, in a sense, in a state of deep unconsciousness. They didn't know who they were, nor what they held within themselves. They were pure forces, but without purpose, as if they were part of the void yet separate from it. The immortality of the void. The strangest thing about this state of stillness was the immortality of the void. There was no beginning or end. It was as if time itself had no power here, as if everything we know as the flow of time was suspended in this eternal abyss. Centuries passed like a single instant, and a single instant could last an eternity. For Tengvun and Lungyeng, who had not yet awakened, this state could have lasted forever. But somewhere deep inside each one there existed a seed of desire. Tengvun, though he did not yet know it, held within him an innate urge to shine. He longed to illuminate, to be seen, to be recognized. But that desire was buried under layers and layers of unconsciousness. In the same way, Lungyeng held at her core the longing to shape something, to manifest the matter that lay dormant within her being. However, these desires remained latent, unable to express themselves. And so it was for countless millennia that everything remained in that state of inertia. But, as in every story, change is inevitable. The first whisper of the void, then one day, or what we might call a day if time had existed back then, something changed. It was so subtle at first that it was barely noticed, but for the void, which had remained completely still for eras, this disturbance was monumental. A faint whisper, like a murmur traveling through the nothingness, began to traverse the vastness of the abyss. It was not a sound as we know it, not a physical noise, but a disturbance in the very essence of the void. It was as if the void itself, for the first time in its existence, had taken a breath. It was like a small ripple that moved slowly, and with each step it took, it gained strength, a strength that could not be measured, because it was something beyond energy as we know it. This whisper, this murmur, was what awakened Tengvun's consciousness. For the first time in his immortal existence, Tengvun felt something. It was not yet light, but it was the precursor to light. It was a spark. Deep within his being, something began to stir, like a tiny flame seeking oxygen. Tengvun, though he didn't yet know it, was awakening. Similarly, deep within the void, Lungyeng also felt something. It was like a weight within her being, a weight that began to stir and move. Lungyeng, who had been an immobile body for so long, felt a growing force within her. It was the matter that was beginning to awaken. It was as if the earth itself, still without form, began to seek a place to manifest. And so began the awakening of the primordial forces. At first it was slow, almost imperceptible. But with each moment that passed, the murmur in the void grew stronger. It became a heartbeat, a pulse, like the first beat of a cosmic heart that was just beginning to pump life. This pulse, this disturbance, would be the catalyst for everything that would come after. The pulse that resonated in the void was unstoppable, a cosmic rhythm that grew in intensity, as if the universe itself was taking its first steps. Tengvun, the spirit of the sky, felt for the first time a full consciousness. He didn't know where it came from, couldn't explain it, but he knew there was something beyond him. That spark that was once a whisper within his being was now a latent fire threatening to overflow. Tengvun began to move, though he didn't know where to. Meanwhile, in the unfathomable depths of the void, Lung Yang, the soul of the earth, was also beginning to awaken. The weight she felt within herself was no longer just pressure, but a tangible force pushing against her being. Lung Yang began to realize her own power, a power that, although not fully formed, was already seeking to manifest. Within her, something was starting to move. It was the primordial matter that had been dormant for eras, the very essence of earth and physical creation. The void, which until then had been unchanging, was stirring. Each beat of the cosmic pulse resonated like an echo that shook the foundations of nothingness. The waves spread everywhere, traveling through the immensity. Where once there was only silence, now there was vibration. Where once there was only stillness, now there was movement. The void, which resisted losing its control, began to fracture. It wasn't a physical fracture, but a division in the very essence of nothingness. Light and matter, which until then had existed in an unconscious state, began to move toward a common point drawn by a force that neither understood. Tengvun and Lung Yang, unknowingly, were being pushed toward an encounter that would change the course of the universe. Finally, it happened. The two forces collided, and that moment was monumental. The collision of Tengvun and Lung Yang was not like the clash of two physical bodies. It was the collision of light and matter in their purest form. The impact was so great that the void itself seemed to writhe under the pressure of this new event. From this encounter, Zangan, the primordial sound, was born. A sound that resonated in all directions and marked the true beginning of creation. Zangan was not a sound as we know it. It was not a physical roar, but a cosmic vibration that shook the void and began to fill the nothingness with something new. With each reverberation of Zangan, the particles of matter that Lung Yang had been holding began to move, stirring as if they had finally been freed. At the same time, Tengvun's light, which until then had been a contained spark, spread in all directions. When Tengvun's light was released, it illuminated the void for the first time. It was pure, blinding light that spread like a wave, flooding what had once been darkness. This light had no form at first, but it was pure energy in its fullest expression. Tengvun felt for the first time the power of his own essence, and with it, an overwhelming desire to create more. He wanted to fill the void with his light. He wanted to see his creation expand to the ends of the universe, but the light alone could not sustain itself. Tengvun knew this, though he couldn't explain it. He knew the light needed something to shine upon, something to give it shape, and that was when he looked toward Lung Yang, his counterpart. Lung Yang contained within her the matter, the substance that could give meaning to Tengvun's light. At that moment, Tengvun and Lung Yang began to work together, though without words or conscious intent. It was a primal instinct. Tengvun projected his light, while Lung Yang released small particles of matter that floated in the void. These particles, touched by the light, began to merge, clustering into increasingly larger masses. At first, these clusters were small and fragile, but over time they began to grow until the first stars were born. The first star was a bright point of light, a spark that ignited in the middle of the abyss. Tengvun watched it in awe. He didn't know how it had happened, but he knew it was only the beginning. With each star he created, the void filled with more and more light. The stars at first were small and distant from each other, but soon they began to cluster into patterns. The first constellations began to form. Each star had its own brightness, its own character. Some were larger and more powerful, while others were small and delicate. Tengvun, driven by his desire to create, began to experiment with different types of stars, playing with their size, their brightness, and their position in the sky. Galaxies were born, immense clusters of stars spiraling, creating complex shapes in the immensity of the void. But not all the stars that Tengvun tried to create were a success. Some exploded shortly after forming, releasing their energy in a burst of light that lit up the sky for a brief moment before disappearing. Other stars simply went out, unable to sustain their own light. Tengvun, though frustrated by these failures, learned from each mistake. His creation was not perfect, but with each attempt, he improved. While Tengvun focused on filling the sky with stars, Lungyang felt her own power growing. Within her, matter began to take shape, not as stars, but as something more solid, denser. Lungyang could feel the weight of the earth within her, and she knew she had to release it. With immense effort, Lungyang created the first rock. This rock, which she called Lungmu, was the first fragment of land in the vast void. It was not an ordinary rock. Lungmu contained within it the very essence of Earth, the matter that would one day shape mountains, valleys, oceans, and rivers. But for now, it was just a rock, floating in the abyss. Lungyang, seeing that her creation was not enough, continued molding more and more matter. The rocks began to cluster, forming larger masses. These masses grew and expanded until the first solid land was created. Lungyang shaped this land with her own hands, creating vast plains, mountain ranges that reached toward the sky, and deep valleys that would one day be filled by rivers. As Tengvun's light illuminated the sky, Lungyang's land stretched in the darkness. For the first time, the void was filled with forms. It was no longer just an endless abyss. Now there was light, land, and matter, but something was still missing. While Tengvun and Lungyang worked on the creation of the sky and the earth, they did not realize that something else was also being born in the depths of the void. As Tengvun's light expanded and Lungyang's matter took shape, forces began to emerge that resisted this change. These forces were not like Tengvun or Lungyang. They were fragments of the ancient darkness, shadows born from the void's resentment at having been stripped of its power. The shadows were beings that moved in the darkness, hiding from Tengvun's light and Lungyang's land. At first, they only observed, but soon they began to act. Akor, the leader of the shadows, decided they could not allow the light and the earth to dominate the universe. The void belonged to them, and they would do whatever it took to restore the old order. This was when the true battle for control of the universe began. As the creation of the universe progressed under the hands of Tengvun and Lungyang, deep in the void, the shadows gathered. These dark beings, born of the resentment and inertia of the primordial void, watched with growing hatred as light and matter gained ground. Akor, their leader, was an entity forged in the very bowels of nothingness, fueled by the desire to restore the realm that had been his. He had no physical form but moved like a black mist, always in the areas where the light had not yet reached, slipping like an invisible ghost to the eyes of the creator gods. Akor and his shadows felt their power diminishing as the universe took shape. The more Tengvun's stars shone, the smaller the darkness they ruled became. And with every mountain, every valley, every rock created by Lungyang, matter replaced the void. Soon, if they did not act, there would be nothing left for them, and the void would be extinguished completely. This cannot continue, Akor thought. His hatred for Tengvun and Lungyang was not just for what they were creating, but for what they were taking away. The eternal silence, the immortal cold, the very inertia of existence were disappearing, and Akor was not willing to allow that. The shadows gathered in the darkest corners of the void, places where the light had not reached. From there, they planned their counterattack. Akor knew they could not face Tengvun directly, whose light was too powerful, but there was something they could attack: the stars. The stars were Tengvun's most prized creation. Each of them shone with a unique light, and together they illuminated the nascent universe. They were a symbol of Tengvun's power and his ability to shape the cosmos. The constellations that were beginning to form were not only beautiful, but also represented the order that Tengvun was attempting to impose on the chaos of the void. But the stars, though powerful, were fragile. Their light depended on the balance of the forces that kept them burning, and it was this balance that Akor and his shadows decided to attack. During the first nights of the new universe, while Tengvun continued creating more and more stars, the shadows began to silently slip toward the youngest constellations. At first, it was just one attack, a lone star in a distant corner of the cosmos. Akor, with his cold and dark touch, enveloped the star and extinguished its light in an instant. The universe barely noticed its disappearance, but Tengvun felt it. Tengvun was immersed in the creation of a new constellation when he felt that something was wrong. It was as if a small part of his being had disappeared. He looked toward the place where the star had shone, and to his surprise found only darkness. At first, he thought it might be an error in his creation, a defective star that had failed to sustain its own light. But soon, more stars began to go out. This wasn't natural. Something was interfering. Akor and his shadows acted swiftly. Wherever they found a young and solitary star, they enveloped it in darkness until its light was completely extinguished. At first, it was just one star here and there, but soon it began to expand, and entire constellations were in danger of being erased from the sky. Tengvun finally understood what was happening. The shadows, beings born from the same nothingness that he was trying to transform, were fighting to regain their dominion. They were forces that could not be ignored, and if he didn't act soon, the universe he had begun to create would be destroyed before it could be completed. Knowing he couldn't face the shadows alone, Tengvun decided to create beings that could protect his stars. Using the same light he had used to create the stars, he shaped the Star Guardians, entities of pure luminous energy. They were radiant beings, whose sole mission was to protect the sky and the constellations from the shadows. The Guardians had no physical form, but they could move quickly through the cosmos, following the currents of light that Tengvun had dispersed throughout the universe. Each constellation would have an assigned guardian, a being that would patrol the area, keeping the shadows at bay. The Star Guardians were directly connected to Tengvun, sharing his light and his consciousness. If one of them fell in battle, Tengvun would know immediately. But the Guardians were powerful, capable of banishing the shadows with a single flash of their light. When the shadows tried to attack again, they were met with a resistance they hadn't expected. The Star Guardians faced them in a series of cosmic battles fought in the heights of the universe. The stars shone even brighter when the Guardians fought, and the shadows, despite their persistence, were driven back again and again. However, the shadows were cunning. They couldn't defeat the Guardians in a direct confrontation, but that didn't mean they were going to give up. Akor, who had observed the first battles from the shadows, knew he had to change tactics if he hoped to defeat Tengvun. Akor, seeing that his shadows were being repelled by the Star Guardians, decided to take drastic measures. Deep within the void, where the light had not yet reached, he began to gather his power. At first, it was just a whisper, a current of darkness swirling silently. But soon, that current grew, and with each passing moment, Akor grew stronger. He knew he couldn't attack Tengvun directly. His counterpart's light was too powerful. But Akor understood something fundamental. The stars were Tengvun's pride, his greatest creation. If he could destroy the stars, he could break the spirit of the god of the sky, and if he achieved that, the void would be his once again. For days and nights, Akor gathered the shadows, preparing a final attack. The battles between the Star Guardians and the shadows continued, but Akor remained in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. He knew he needed a decisive blow, something that would destabilize Tengvun completely. Finally, the moment came. On a night that seemed endless, Akor unleashed all his fury upon the stars. The shadows multiplied, emerging from the darkest corners of the void, and attacked en masse. The Star Guardians, though powerful, were not prepared for an assault of this magnitude. The stars began to fall. Tengvun, feeling the attack, hurried to send more guardians, but it seemed that every time one of them managed to defend a constellation, another star fell somewhere distant in the universe. Akor, seeing that his shadows were being repelled by the Star Guardians, decided to take drastic measures. Deep within the void, where the light had not yet reached, he began to gather his power. At first, it was just a whisper, a current of darkness swirling silently. But soon, that current grew, and with each passing moment, Akor grew stronger. He knew he couldn't attack Tengvun directly. His counterpart's light was too powerful. But Akor understood something fundamental. The stars were Tengvun's pride, his greatest creation. If he could destroy the stars, he could break the spirit of the god of the sky. And if he achieved that, the void would be his once again. For days and nights, Akor gathered the shadows, preparing a final attack. The battles between the Star Guardians and the shadows continued, but Akor remained in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. He knew he needed a decisive blow, something that would destabilize Tengvun completely. Finally, the moment came. On a night that seemed endless, Akor unleashed all his fury upon the stars. The shadows multiplied, emerging from the darkest corners of the void, and attacked en masse. The Star Guardians, though powerful, were not prepared for an assault of this magnitude. The stars began to fall. Tengvun, feeling the attack, hurried to send more guardians, but it seemed that every time one of them managed to defend a constellation, another star fell somewhere distant in the universe. As the war for control of the stars intensified, Lung Yang, who had until then remained focused on the creation of the earth and the seas, began to feel the chaos in the heavens. Though Lung Yang was the goddess of matter and earth, she knew that her creation was intertwined with Tengvun's light. If the stars fell, the balance of the universe would also be broken. Lung Yang decided to intervene. With her power, she created Earth Guardians, massive beings of stone and rock, who rose from the depths of the earth to join the battle. The Earth Guardians could not fly like the Star Guardians, but they could project their energy into the sky, creating barriers that prevented the shadows from advancing. The union of the Star Guardians and the Earth Guardians began to tip the scales in favor of Tengvun and Lung Yang. Together, the gods and their creations fought to maintain the balance of the universe. Finally, after a cosmic battle that seemed to last eons, Tengvun and Lung Yang managed to repel the shadows. Akor, weakened and defeated, was exiled to the farthest corners of the cosmos, where the light of the stars would never reach. There, in the depths of the void, Akor vowed to return one day when the universe was at its most vulnerable. But for now, the victory belonged to Tengvun and Lung Yang. The stars shone brighter than ever, and Lung Yang's earth stabilized. The universe was at peace, though both knew that this peace would not last forever. With the shadows contained and the universe in balance, Tengvun and Lung Yang resumed their work. The stars, now protected by the Star Guardians, continued to multiply, filling the sky with their light. Meanwhile, Lung Yang continued to expand the earth, creating vast mountains, rivers, and seas. But they knew something was still missing. Though light and earth had been created, the world was empty. There were no beings to walk on the land, to admire the stars, or to interact with the gods. It was then that Tengvun and Lung Yang decided it was time to create life. Before humans were created, the gods discussed what kind of beings would inhabit the world. They knew that the beings that came after had to have a spark of Tengvun's light, but also the solidity of Lung Yang's earth. They would be creatures capable of feeling, thinking, and building, but also of destroying if they were not properly guided. Tengvun and Lung Yang began to prepare the ground for the arrival of life, but they knew this would be their greatest challenge. And this time, there would be no room for errors. With the cosmic battle between Tengvun and Akor over and the shadows relegated to the farthest parts of the void, the universe had reached equilibrium. But this equilibrium, though stable for now, was not complete. The stars shone in the heavens, mountains rose majestically, rivers flowed, and seas stretched to the horizon, but everything was empty. Tengvun's light illuminated a world that had no eyes to admire it, and Lung Yang's matter felt no weight of creatures to roam it. Tengvun, still fascinated by the creation of the stars, knew something was missing. The stars were beautiful but static. They could not move. They could not interact with the earth or the wind. Lung Yang, who felt the earth within her, also knew that her creation, though solid and stable, was incomplete. The earth had been created to sustain life, but there were still no beings that could walk through its valleys, swim in its oceans, or climb its mountains. Tengvun and Lung Yang, after centuries of contemplation and work, came to an agreement. They would create life, but it would not be just any life. It would be a life that combined the forces of both. beings that would have Tengvun's light and the strength of Lungyang's earth. Before creating the first human beings, Tengvun and Lungyang knew they needed guardians who could maintain the balance of the natural world. So before life walked the earth, the gods created the elemental gods, entities that would control the different aspects of nature and ensure that harmony was not broken. First, Zilimo, the god of wind and air, was born. Tengvun, taking a breath of air from the deepest part of his being, shaped Zilimo, whose breath would move the clouds, drive storms, and allow the future inhabitants of the world to feel the freshness of the wind. Once created, Zilimo began to roam the skies, moving the air currents throughout the world, filling the void with his presence. Then, from Lungyang's waters came Ranghum, the goddess of oceans, rivers, and rain. Ranghum was serene but powerful. Her waters flowed gracefully through the newly formed rivers and filled the oceans with potential life. Without water, life could not thrive, and Ranghum understood that her role would be crucial in the future of the world. The third to be born was Zire, the god of fire. Tengvun, with a spark of his purest light, ignited the heart of Zire, who brought with him heat, the fire of volcanoes, and the power to purify and destroy. Zire understood that his fire could be both a gift and a threat, but he knew that without it, the cycle of life could not be completed. Finally, from the depths of the earth itself, Tsamzu, the goddess of earth and fertility, emerged. Tsamzu was connected to everything that grew, from the tallest trees to the smallest herbs. Under her care, plants would flourish, and animals would find food and shelter. With the elemental gods in place, the world was ready to receive its first inhabitants. Tengvun and Lungyang knew that the beings who would inhabit the world had to be special. They couldn't be simple creatures, but beings who were aware, who could admire the beauty of the universe, but also interact with it, change it, shape it. Lungyang, taking a handful of earth, began to mold the first body. She created two figures, one male and one female, made of clay and stardust. She gave them a robust form, capable of walking through mountains, swimming in rivers, and working the land. But these figures, though beautiful, were empty. They had no life. It was then that Tengvun intervened. He bent over the figures and breathed a part of his light into them, a spark of life that ignited their hearts. Thus, the first human beings, Lungvunin and Lungvuni, came to life. They opened their eyes for the first time, and the world, with all its beauty and potential, unfolded before them. At first, Lungvunin and Lungvune were like children. They didn't know how to use their bodies or what to do with the creation that surrounded them, but Tengvun, Lungyang, and the elemental gods guided them. Zilimo taught them to feel the wind, to understand the changes in the air, and to use it to travel. Ranghum showed them the rivers, how to find water, and how to use it to cultivate the land. Zire taught them to light a fire, a power that would bring them warmth, light, and protection, but also warned them of its destructive potential. Tsamzu showed them how to plant seeds and care for the earth, how to raise animals and feed on the fruits of nature. The humans, under the tutelage of the gods, began to thrive. They spread across the earth, building small villages and exploring the edges of the world that had been given to them. Soon, they learned to tell stories, and the first legends about the creator gods began to circulate among them. Tengvun and Lungyang were revered as the parents of the world, and the humans paid tribute to them to ensure that the balance between light and earth was maintained. The Naga are mythological beings that appear in various cultures of Southeast Asia and India, depicted as half-serpent, half-human creatures. They are fascinating not only because they are part of mythology, but also because they symbolize the connection between the spiritual and natural worlds. In Hindu and Buddhist cultures, the Naga are often said to live in rivers, lakes, or underground, and are associated with water, an essential element for life and fertility. The Naga not only control the rains, but they are also protectors of water sources, making them guardians of natural balance. One of the most well-known Naga is Shesha, the king of all Naga, who, according to Hindu mythology, holds the world on his many heads. This reflects the importance of the Naga as symbols of stability and cosmic order. However, the Naga also have a dual nature. On one hand, they are protectors of life and help maintain the balance of the natural world, like the Naga Muchalinda, who protected Buddha while he meditated in the rain. On the other hand, they can also be destroyers, reflecting the unpredictability of water, which can give life but also cause destruction when it gets out of control. Thank you for joining us on this amazing story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a comment. Let us know which part touched you the most, or what story you'd like us to tell next. Remember to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any episodes full of magic and adventure. Give it a like if you loved the story, and share the video with your friends so they can enjoy these unforgettable tales too. See you in the next story.